Hey guys, you're back with Funman Education, and today we are going to continue solving the June 2019 question paper for business paper 1, and we're going to start section B. So the extract for this section, you can read it by yourself, and it is basically about a desert shop, which is a private limited company based in Devon, and it sells handmade desserts and puddings. And the owners of this business were previously in the food industry, but they left and they started this company by themselves. And they have a good reputation for being flexible and they meet customer needs. And then it talks about how they have a relationship with their suppliers, and they recently employed a new head chef from Switzerland who has introduced a new range of menu, and it has new desserts. And because of this, there has been a very high demand and an increase in demand for the deserts for this company, but they are struggling to meet this increase in demand so suddenly. So they're thinking of expanding or relocating into new premises. So this is basically the overview of the extract. And after you're done reading it, we can go on with our question answers. So for part A, outline one risk taken by the owners when starting a last course patisserie. So when they moved from their their previous business to the new business, and when they started it, what was one risk that was taken by them? So one risk could have been, they risked financial loss. There is no guarantee that there would be very high demand for handmade desserts, or there was no guarantee that this business would sell. So that was one loss that they one risk that they took. So financial risk. um there was no shorting. All right. Moving on to part B, analyze the impact on lost course patisserie of operating as a private limited company. So here we're basically going to talk about one impact of being a private limited company for such an entity. So first of all, being a private limited company, it makes it easier to raise finance for this business as it can sell its shares. So that is what we're going to write. Oops. So easier to raise finance, and because they can sell shares, that's what you have to mention. And because it's easier to raise finance through the sale of shares, the business will be able to acquire a huge amount of funds to increase production of the desserts on the new menu which was mentioned, right? So can get money to invest in new menu. So the new menu that the chef from Switzerland brought on, they can have a huge amount of money to invest on that menu, and they can also purchase whatever resources needed, such as a machinery maybe. Right. And so that is one impact, and another impact might be that, which is a problem basically, might be that shareholders may not agree to one location of setting up the new premises, and this would sort of lead to a conflict of interest, which might not be the most favorable situation for the business. So All right, so that is that. And for okay, now we move on to question 5. So question 5, the first part is we are given some information about costs and the selling price, and we are asked to calculate the level of output required to break even in April. So this is basically a break even question. So if you remember, since you're advised to show your workings, so we are going to write down the formula. Break even equals fixed costs by selling price minus variable cost per unit. So over here we are given the fixed costs. So 2730, selling price was 2 minus variable cost per unit. So packaging is a variable cost as well raw materials are variable costs. So it's 2.5 plus 0.2, which eventually gets us to a value of 2100 deserts, which is our break-even point where our total costs are equal to total revenue. And then in May, suppliers increased the cost of raw materials by 4%. Calculate the variable cost per desert following the increase in the cost of raw materials. So my existing cost of raw materials is 0.5, and I'm going to add another 4% increase on it. So we are firstly going to find 4% of 0.5, which is 0.02. So the new cost is basically 0.5 plus 0.02, which is 0.72. Pretty simple calculations. Now we're going to move on to part C. So for part C, it says UK consumer incomes are expected to rise over the next 10 years. So this is talking about an external factor which might have an impact on the business. So analyze the likely impact on the company of this changing level of consumer income. So like I said, an external factor, which is a change in income, how is it gonna benefit or harm the company in our case? So in our case, it's a benefit. So firstly, we're going to talk about how the first point will say people will have higher incomes and they will be more likely to spend on luxury desserts, such as the handmade desserts made by our company. So more income will mean more spending on desserts, and this will increase our demand for the desserts. Demand will increase. I'm just writing the points down. You are going to write the entire sentence, elaborate and stuff. And if there is more income, there is more spending by consumers on the deserts, and demand for our deserts increase, this will support our plans to expand, which we were initially talking about in the extract if you go back. So supports our expansion plans. Supports expansion plans, and the increase in recent demand for deserts is likely to have a sustained meaning for a longer term investment, and this will also reduce the risk involved in our business. So long term investment, lower risk. All right, so moving on to question 6. The new head chef carried out secondary market research to identify information about the food market. State one benefit to the company of conducting secondary market research. So secondary market research is basically carrying out research from information that is already present in a few sources. So one advantage is that research into foods have already been carried out, and thus it will save our time to conduct that research. because it already exists. Part B, outline one impact on a stakeholder group of last course patisserie if it relocates to new premises. So, our stakeholders are firstly our shareholders, our suppliers, our workers, our chefs, everyone. So, one impact that we can think of is we could talk about our workers or our employees. So employees will be affected as they may have to travel, a farther distance from their home to the new location. So that is one impact on them. So one stakeholder is our employees, and for identifying employees you get 1 mark here, and then you talk about how they're going to be impacted. So they may have to travel further. That's it. Now moving on to part C, which is a 9 marker. So in order to increase the number of desserts that can be produced to meet the extra demand, last course patisserie is considering 2 options. So now we are down to the expansion phase, and we can expand in 2 ways: investing in new machinery or employing more staff. Justify which one of these 2 options the company should choose. So we're basically going to talk about the options and then later justify which one is a better option for the company to choose. So we can start with machinery. So option 1. So firstly, machinery is more productive than human beings. Machinery can work more quickly than employees, and it will increase productivity and the rate of production. All right. Now, the increase in production will allow more desserts to be produced given the same amount of time. So that is what productivity increase in productivity does. I can produce more number of desserts in the same amount of time, and this will decrease my average cost and increase my competitive edge and also my profits. So more productivity means that reduction in average costs. Okay, now we talked about 2 advantages, and now we're gonna give a however point. So as we all know that investing in machinery is pretty expensive. It involves high initial costs, and a problem is that it may be wasted if the demand in deserts are not sustainable. In that case, we are gonna encounter a loss. Now let's talk about option 2. So for option 2, employing more staff would use the existing production methods. So we are still sticking to the existing production methods. If we employ more staff, now how is that beneficial? It can keep on being flexible as it has been for all these years. When making its product, it can be handmade, for which it is famous, and therefore quality would still be the same and the value for the products will still be the same. So it will be handmade, and that is what it's famous for, and they will continue being that, and they would continue catering to customer satisfaction that way. Now, what is a however point for this? So, the problem with sticking to employee production is that, as it has already been mentioned, the high demand, the company is struggling to meet the high demand with the given amount of staff. Even if we increase staff, as we have said, staff might not be able to continue being as productive to meet the given amount of high demand that the company is currently facing, and that's why production may not be able to supply, the market demand efficiently, and we may lose out on customers. All right. So we evaluated both the points, and now we're just going to write. For me, in conclusion, I'd write, I would go for investing in more machinery as a source of expansion, because it would allow us to have a higher productivity given the same amount of time, and would result in higher profits. And as we are already facing, a high demand, so there is a lesser chance that we are going to make a loss, and hopefully the higher demand will be sustainable. And so I am going to choose option 1, and that concludes my answer. And that concludes the section over here as well. We'll see you next time with section C.